Hello, I am Daisy, your hostess, and you are in my book playlist. Welcome to my channel. We are going through the book titled The Power of Constructive Thinking by Emmet Fox. Before I move on to the next section, I'm going to give some pointers from the previous 3 chapters, which were titled No Results Without Prayer, Faith, and the 7-Day Mental Diet. As I mentioned before, regardless of religion or not, if you are not of religion, I hope you do not take offense and do not shy away from getting the golden nuggets that Emmet Fox is sharing with us in these sections that he's providing. And so we have here in the section titled No Results Without Prayer, Emmet Fox makes a very bold statement. And as I mentioned, he does say, or he calls these as treatments, which I actually like the reference of prayer as a treatment, because it's almost like you're pausing your day, you're pausing the moment to treat yourself, to bring yourself back into alignment. And so he does say that these treatments are useful things to have. So it's like tools in your toolbox. It's ways that you can cope with life, things that give you a chance to fight and deal with the situation that you have at hand, so you can fall back on these when everything fails. And I think that it is our nature that we want to always be doing something, because we feel like if we're not doing something, nothing's happening. And I'm learning also now as I'm older that sometimes in the absence of nothing happening, your faith is happening. And once you have used and given yourself a treatment, made a statement of declaration, and have put it out there with faith that, something is going to come back in its stead, and that's the demonstration of your faith. And that goes with that saying, that as you believe, so things are. And it's very hard, when things are going bad, to stay positive. But that is the challenge, isn't it? I mean, that's the whole point of being able to build up your faith and to just go on every day knowing that in some time in the future that will show up just when divine timing dictates that it should. The other couple points that he mentioned was that many people lose the ability to receive intuitional messages. Now, some people have no idea what that looks like. People don't understand how divine works with us. Sometimes it is a message where you feel deeply in your heart. Other times it's through nature. Other times it's through other people. And the thing is how do we know that it's source that's speaking with us? And the only way that I can say for sure is that there's a sense of peace when it comes through. When truth comes to us, there's a sense of peace, and there is no second guessing, and it just kind of flows. And finally, the other point that I liked very much was to practice the presence of God in our lives to attract harmony. And so how do we practice the presence of God? And that, I believe, should be a topic for another day in another video. The next 2 sections, both the one on faith and the 7-Day Mental Diet, are really worth their weight in salt. Very good chapters. Please, if you have not seen that video or heard that video, I invite you to go ahead and go to my book playlist and grab them there. In a nutshell, the saying from the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, verse 1 through 6, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen, sums it all up. Because it is true that, when you have faith, you are already putting something out that you cannot see. But you move every day with the conviction that it sure will manifest in your life. Now, I do like how Emmet Fox explained what hope is. Almost like saying, hey, you know what? Hope does not get anywhere close to faith, because hope is from a point of anguish and despair. Well, I hope, and you're like not quite sure, but faith is a true conviction. And the section on the 7-Day Mental Diet, I can tell you, I do say that would definitely be challenging to try to, keep your mind focused on only that which is good, watching your thoughts of negativity, and making sure that you're you're putting out things in the universe that you truly want to see. And that's a challenge. And how he says, when you put yourself on that 7-day mental diet, don't tell anyone, just go through it. And if you can get through those 7 days, then you can share, and you will start seeing those rewards in your lives, because you will have changed. In my opinion, he didn't say that, but I think you will have changed something within you that actually raises your intuition, raises your energy, raises your vibration. Well, having said all that, I do would love to hear your comments. Please post them, and let's get ready as I turn the page to the next section. Power Through Constructive Thinking by Emmet Fox. This book is in the public domain. This section is titled Life After Death. Resurgam. There is no death. Our stars go down to rise upon the fairer shore, and bright in heaven's jeweled crown they shine forevermore. There is no death. The dust we tread shall change beneath the summer showers to golden grain or mellow fruit, or rainbow-tinted flowers. The granite rocks in powder fall, and feed the hungry moss. They bear the fairest leaves, drink daily life from out the viewless air. There is no death. The leaves may fall, the flowers may fade and pass away. They only wait through wintry hours the coming of the May. And, ever near us, though unseen, the fair immortal spirits tread, for all the boundless universe is life. There are no dead. Attributed to Bulwer Lytton. Life After Death. Quote, into the hand that made the rose, shall I with trembling fall? End quote. George Meredith. There is absolutely no reason to fear death. The same God is on the other side of the grave as on this side, and the Bible tells us that God is love, and we know that He is also boundless intelligence and infinite power. It is true that most people do fear death, more or less, but this fear is partly that normal fear of the unknown that is apt to affect us all. The fear, as it were, of taking a leap in the dark, and partly it is the result of the false teaching on the subject that most people acquire in their youth. In the hope of disciplining them and frightening them into good conduct, people have been taught throughout the ages to regard death with horror. Such, of course, is a mistaken policy, because good never comes out of evil, and fear, in particular, is never constructive. Nevertheless, men have been taught in most places and in all ages to fear death, in the hope that under the shadow of that fear they would behave themselves better during life. The time has now come, however, when the mass of the people no longer believe in these threats, but are prepared to hear the truth. The actual truth is that there is no death. When a person seems to die, all that happens is that he leaves his body here and goes over onto the next plane, otherwise unchanged. He falls asleep here to wake up on the other side, minus his physical body, which was probably more or less damaged, but enriched with the knowledge that he has not really died. This is the story of what we call death, and in most cases, it is easier than being born. To understand clearly how this process comes about, you have to realize that you really possess not one body, but two. It may surprise you to be told that right here at the present moment, you have not only the physical body that you know about, the thing that you see when you look into the glass, but a second body which is none the less substantial because you cannot see it, and that this body is made of ether. This statement may surprise you, but it is true. The etheric body is the same shape as your physical body. but it is slightly larger and it interpenetrates the physical body as air fills a sponge. It does not surround it but interpenetrates it. It may help you to think of it as a replica of the physical body in ether. There are a few people who can see the etheric body when they concentrate for that purpose, because they have the power of contacting much finer vibrations than can be perceived by the ordinary physical senses. But of course, the vast majority lack this power. All the time you are awake, your two bodies remain together, interpenetrating each other. But when you fall asleep, the greater part of your etheric slips out of the physical. And in reality, this slipping out of the etheric is what constitutes sleep. The same sort of thing happens when you become unconscious, either from taking an anesthetic or from a blow on the head, or if you fall into what is called a trance, or into some form of coma. All these conditions differ somewhat one from another, but they all have this in common, that more or less of the etheric slips out of the physical body, taking consciousness with it. The etheric body is not a simple homogeneous thing, but is composed of several different ethers of different densities. Nevertheless, for our purpose, we shall treat it as one. The physical body is composed of solids, liquids, and gases, and many complicated and distinct organs, but in studying the biography of a man, we treat his body as a unit, and in the same way we shall treat the etheric as one. Now, it is this etheric body which is the repository of all your thoughts and feelings. It includes what are often called the conscious and the subconscious minds. It is the psyche of the psychologist, and it is in fact your human personality. That is why personality survives death, because it resides in the etheric, which passes over intact, and not in the physical, which breaks up into decomposition when it is left alone. I have said that your etheric is the seat of all feeling, and this is true. It may surprise you to hear that there is no sensation in the physical body, but such is the case. When you think you have a pain in your physical body, that pain is really in the etheric counterpart, and that is why anesthesia is possible. When you take a general anesthetic, the etheric is thrown out, and therefore you do not experience bodily sensations. People undergoing a major operation under an anesthetic have sometimes remained perfectly conscious, but out of the body, and have watched the surgeon at work with interest and attention. When you take a local anesthetic, such as Novocaine, the local part of the etheric is driven out and you have no feeling there. But as the effect of the Novocaine wears off, that portion of the etheric returns, and as those who have been in the hands of the dentist know, the pain gradually comes back. In all these cases, when the etheric leaves the physical body, it remains attached to it by an etheric ligament, very much like a boy's kite floating at the end of the string which he holds in his hand. This etheric connection is called, in the Bible, the silver cord. It is a bluish-gray in color and is so elastic that the etheric body can go very long distances away and still remain attached to the physical corpus. In sleep, by far the greater part of the etheric slips out. In very materialistic and otherwise underdeveloped people, the etheric remains only a yard or two from the body, usually floating overhead. But with people of some degree of mental training, and especially with those who have some spiritual development, it passes right over onto the next plane, and sometimes beyond that. The difference between normal sleep and anesthesia and the different kinds of trance is a question of how much of the etheric goes out at that particular time, that is, at all. Footnote: from the Bible, the book of Numbers, chapter 14, verse 4, also the book of Acts, chapters 10, verse 10, chapter 11, verse 5, and chapter 22, verse 17. When we see people nodding asleep and then waking up and then nodding again, it means that the etheric is wobbling in and out. So your etheric slips out every time you go to sleep and returns when you wake up again. That is, as long as the silver cord remains unbroken. Now, what is death? Well, death is the breaking of the silver cord. As long as that remains intact, you are alive, whether you are conscious or not. But once it is broken, you are dead. Death is the severing of the silver cord. As soon as it is cut, you are dead. You are definitely cut off from your physical body, and your life on this plane is over. So this then is death. Your etheric body, which is your personality, has severed its connection with the physical body, and as that body is your only means of functioning on the physical plane, you have finished with your earth life. Now we come to that vital question. What precisely is it that happens to a person when he dies, when the silver cord is severed? What does he think? What does he feel? Well, as a rule, he immediately falls into a state of total unconsciousness, which may last for days or even weeks. During this time, the etheric, that is, he himself, passes over onto the next plane, and he is in the next world. Here, in due course, he wakes up very much as we wake up from sleep on this plane, and his new life has begun. It is an interesting fact that at the instant preceding death, the whole of the past life unfolds before the mind exactly like a moving picture reel flashing by. The actual speed is so great that it all happens in a split second. Yet the mind sees every detail clearly. It is possible to come so near death that without actually dying, one can still come back and continue to live after this has happened, but usually only in cases of near death from asphyxiation. Only in near drowning, suffocation, or gassing, as a rule, is the process slow enough to admit of this. This experience is really, of course, the unfolding of the subconscious mind, the judgment books of Scripture, and an exceedingly awe-inspiring and sometimes terrible experience it is, as one can easily imagine. It is with this authentic inside story of his life fresh in his memory that the traveler begins his life on the other side. Here, it is natural to ask, where is the next world situated? Is it up in the sky or down under the ground? The answer is that it is in neither of these places. The next world is actually all around us here. The so-called dead are carrying on their lives right here where we are now, but in their own world and in their own way. The reason we do not see them around us or collide with them is the same reason that one radio program does not interfere with another. They are on different wavelengths. There is not merely one etheric plane, as many people think, but many. Each one less dense than the previous one, going on to infinity, and they all interpenetrate one another. The activities of any one plane do not interfere in any way with those of any of the others for the reason just given. There is relatively a very great difference between the density of any one of these planes and that of the next one to it, so that normally there is no passing from one to another. Upon waking up on the next plane, the dead person notes certain familiar aspects in the world about him, but remarks some curious difference too. If he has been very ill, or if he is an elder person, he is agreeably surprised by a sense of well-being and youth. This is because, having left the worn-out body on the earth plane, it no longer restricts the full functioning of his mind. He is able to see his etheric body, and it now seems to him as substantial as the old physical body seemed. Again, one of the principal differences between this plane and the next is that there are 4 dimensions over there, whereas here, of course, we know only 3. All objects there are four-dimensional, and it takes him some time to get used to that. Of course, a four-dimensional object cannot be described here in words, but you will easily see that it means an enormous extension of experience and therefore of interest. Consider how tremendously the world of a two-dimensional being, say a worm, would be explained if he became three-dimensional. And you can realize something of the enhanced interest of the next plane when one of us goes over there. Some writers, unfortunately, are in the habit of speaking of heaven as the fourth dimension. This is quite wrong, because heaven is a world of infinite dimension. What metaphysical writers say about heaven is usually correct, except that it is not the fourth dimension. Also, there are new colors and new sounds on the next plane, far surpassing in beauty the colors and the sounds which we have here, and it is a fact that new experience of every sort awaits the traveler on his arrival. Perhaps the most startling change that the traveler has to meet is the fact that over there, thought reading is the normal means of communication. In the next world, thoughts are read directly, and therefore there is no deception. Everyone is seen to be just what he is, and there is no room for hypocrisy or pretense. All the labor and nervous strain of keeping up appearances that wears out the lives of so many foolish people over here is unknown there. You pass for what you are, and that is the end of the matter. One soon gets accustomed to this, and then no one there would wish it to be the otherwise. There are no old people on the other side for the following reason. What we see here as an elderly gentleman is in fact a man of mature mind whose body has begun to decay so that all his faculties are dimmed. He sees poorly, is almost deaf, moves about with difficulty, finds his memory impaired, and in many cases it is difficult to make him understand things we wish to say to him. And these conditions are simply due to the decay of the physical body preventing his etheric from functioning efficiently. And now that the physical body is thrown away, he naturally regains the full use of his powers. And so, in the next world, he will be a man in the prime of life. On the other hand, children who pass over, not having yet reached maturity of mind, continue to grow up on the other side until they do reach the prime of life. There are many different localities on the next plane, differing very much one from another, just as in this world we find countries as different as Sweden and Italy, for example, and even in the same city we find such different conditions as the squalid streets of slumland and the beautiful sections occupied by wealthy and cultured people. Instead, there is a much greater variety of living conditions over there than anything that we find on this earth, so that one might compare the going over to the experience of a man who spends most of his life on a small island here, and then suddenly leaves that island to explore the whole world. What is it that determines the kind of place to which you will go after death, and the sort of people among whom you will find yourself? Of course, it is not a matter of chance or luck any more than is the nature of your surroundings here. You will go to the sort of place and be among the sort of people for whom you have prepared yourself by your habitual thinking and your mode of living while on this earth. No one sends you anywhere. You naturally gravitate to the place where you belong. You have built up a certain character, that is, a certain mentality by your years of thinking, speaking, and acting on this plane. That is the kind of person you are at the moment, and you find yourself in conditions corresponding to your personality. Remember that death makes positively no change in you. You are just the same person that you were before it happened. You have your full memory, and you remember the general events of your life just as well, and somewhat better than you did toward the end of your life here. Students of metaphysics understand that all our conditions in this world are the result of our thoughts and convictions, and precisely the same thing is true of the next world. On this plane, people with the same interests tend to attract one another. The law that birds of a feather flock together holds throughout the universe. There is, however, one extremely important difference. On the other side, your thoughts are demonstrated immediately. In this world, as we know, it may take days, weeks, and even years before mental states come out into manifestation. But over there, they demonstrate at once. Whatever you think or feel strongly, you experience instantly as an outer condition, and this is rather confusing at first. To those on the other side, the ether seems just as solid as physical matter does to us, and in the beginning, they expect it to have the inertia which it does not possess. They are surprised and disconcerted when they constantly find that it submits immediately to the molding of their thought. They feel rather like a person whose automobile gets out of control and runs away with him. They think, and something happens to correspond. It surprises or frightens them, and this fright causes an intensification of the phenomenon, or perhaps a seeming cataclysm. And confusion, worse confounded, multiplies until the newcomer pulls himself together and learns to control his thinking. One would naturally suppose that under these conditions, he need only be careful what he does think, and all will be well, and this is perfectly true. But in practice, it is difficult instantly to change one's habits of thought in this way. If we have accustomed ourselves when on earth to negative thinking, to thoughts of fear, criticism, ill will, or sickness, it takes some time to overcome such habits when we get across. Most of us know only too well, particularly those of us who have tried the 7-day mental diet, that changing our current of thought is not an easy matter, but of course, it has to be done. At this point, let it be clearly understood that this next plane is not heaven or the conscious presence of God. Those people who work through great difficulties in this world and go over with an enlightened consciousness find themselves so much better off that they sometimes think it must be heaven. But it is not. It is a limited etheric world. Less limited than is this plane, but limited nevertheless, and just as liable to discord and decay. Indeed, objects over there decay much more quickly than do objects on this plane. Instead of broken or worn out objects lying about for a long time as they do with us, the forms in which people are no longer interested melt right back into the ether immediately. And this makes newcomers think that there is no decay there. But there is, only it is ended much more quickly. In our world, for example, a chair, let us say, or a suit of clothes is manufactured, whereupon it immediately begins to wear out. This process, however, is a very slow one, so much so that even after it becomes too shabby or damaged for further use, the fragments of it still lie about for years and years before falling into dust, if not otherwise disposed of. On the next plane, a discarded etheric form fades out very quickly. You do not meet God on the next plane any more than you do on this plane. God is everywhere. Of course, he is fully present on the next plane just as he is on this plane, but there, as here, he is to be contacted only in one's own consciousness by some form of prayer or spiritual treatment. Heaven is that perfect state of consciousness in which one is in full realization of the divine presence. In that consciousness, there's no limitation or evil or decay of any kind. When one attains to that condition, he has finished with etheric planes just as surely as he has finished with the plane of physical matter. If you can reach to that level of consciousness while still in this world, and a few have succeeded in doing so, you do not die or go across to the etheric planes at all. You go straight to heaven from this earth. Moses did this, and Enoch, and Elijah, and a few others. This is what is called translation or dematerialization. It is accomplished by the overcoming of the sense of separation from God, which is really the fall of man. It means overcoming selfishness, sensuality, criticism, fear, and other such things. It means living nearer and nearer to God every day. Of Enoch, the Bible says he walked with God before he was translated, and indeed there is no other way to freedom. Footnote from the book of Genesis, chapter 5, verse 24. There are some very unpleasant localities in the next world. It is no use ignoring this fact just for sentimental reasons. But the average person does not go to any of them. People who lead very evil lives on this earth, whose minds are chiefly given up to hatred, deceit, or sensuality, will find themselves in such places. This does not mean the average man or woman who may fall into wrongdoing under the pressure of severe temptation, but people whose whole lives are deliberately wrong. These are the places referred to as hell by the Orthodox preachers. They are not places of vindictive punishment, and they certainly do not last forever, but only until the delinquent has seen the error of his ways and has reformed. Let me repeat that no one sends anyone to these places. They are merely the natural surroundings of a soul which has gotten itself into that condition by repeatedly choosing the lower in preference to the higher. Neither does anyone determine when the punishment will cease. The escape from such conditions takes place automatically as soon as the soul is sufficiently changed. Someone may be inclined to ask whether it is appropriate to speak of localities on the next plane, since such places are really but the outpicturing of the subject's own thoughts. The answer is that this is all that localities are on this plane. What we call a country or a city or a house or a room in this world is but our pictured thought, nothing more, and indeed the only fundamental differences over there are the absence of inertia, which makes things happen almost instantaneously, and the existence of the extra dimension. So it happens that once people wake up in the next world and begin to get used to the conditions, they usually have a great sense of physical well-being and a most interesting and instructive life. The conditions of living are utterly different from ours. There, your money is no longer of the slightest use to you. You can't take it with you, and only the mental and spiritual wealth that you have accumulated can go along. There is no money as we understand it because, thought being immediately demonstrated, there is no need to purchase objective possessions. What you are able to think of clearly, you have. Many fine things will still be out of the reach of many people there because they cannot clearly conceive them. And is not this the exact truth about our own world also? In this world, anything that you can clearly conceive comes into your possession if you really want it, and anything that you truly understand becomes yours in still deeper sense, for you never can lose it. The chief difference between the two worlds is, once more, that results come so much more slowly in this world, owing to the inertia of physical matter, which over there they do not have to meet. There is no childbirth on the next plane, and therefore no marriage or family life as we understand it. And when you consider the extraordinary importance of the family on this plane, you will see that without it, the whole scheme of living must be different. Will you meet your relatives and friends when you go over? People naturally wonder whether they will see again those whom they loved who have passed out of sight. And to tell the truth, many are quite apprehensive of having to renew their contact with people whom they have disliked, members of the family perhaps whom they would much prefer never to meet again. The fact is that where there is a strong emotional link either of love or hatred, there is likely to be a meeting. Where there is a strong link of genuine love, there is sure to be a meeting. Where there is no particular feeling between two people, there will not be a meeting. Of course, love will take care of itself, but there is a real danger that if you allow yourself to indulge in hatred of anyone, you will meet when you have both passed over. To prevent this happening, destroy the link by ceasing to hate. Forgive the other person and set him free in your thought. Well, you do not have to like him, but you must wish him well. Footnote. See essay, The Lord's Prayer. End footnote. Do not imagine that your family will ever be reassembled on the other side. Family relationships are for this plane only and have no existence there. Your father will not be your father on the other side, but a friend who played the role of father over here. Your daughter will no longer be your daughter there, but a friend who enacted the part of daughter to you for a number of years on the earth. Some people imagine that the whole earth family must be reassembled as a family over there, but consider what this would mean. You had two parents and probably some brothers and sisters. Each of your parents had two parents and probably some brothers and sisters, and so forth. And so you will see what the compulsory reunion of families would involve in a few generations. The actual fact is, I have stated, that the relationships of parents and children, brothers and sisters, uncles and nephews, husbands and wives, are but temporary arrangements for this life only. If two brothers or a parent and child have a strong bond of sympathy in this life, they will meet again and perhaps be closely associated on the next plane. But this will be because of the bond of sympathy and not because they happen to be members of the same family here. When a marriage is satisfying to both parties here, the partnership can continue by mutual consent on the other side. Otherwise, death dissolves a marriage, and the two need never even meet again, much less resume any kind of mutual bond. Beyond the next plane, there are other planes, and after a certain length of time over there, most people develop mentally and spiritually so that they graduate out of that plane onto the next higher one. That plane has 5 dimensions, and the ether composing it is far less dense than of the one next to us, and in turn presents many new opportunities to the developing soul. After death, one's instinct is to lead somewhat the same type of life he has been accustomed to here, and this is why some intellectual or artistic training, and particularly some spiritual development, makes no difference. There is no limit over there to the opportunities for intellectual study and attainment. Most of the age-old and to us insoluble problems of philosophy and religion can be answered on the next plane with some study and trouble. Of course, this only means that new ones then come up for consideration because as we lengthen our vision, so does the horizon but grow. Nevertheless, wonderful progress in the understanding of life can be, and is made along these lines. The artist and the musician at last begin to get things their own way. The lack of commercial aptitude which usually marks the genuine artist, and for which he is so often punished in this world, is no detriment over there. And the etheric conditions present little or no difficulty, such as physical matter does to the development of literary, artistic, and musical gifts. It is worth mentioning that even a little study along intellectual lines while in this world, and even a very little genuine interest in art or music, is sufficient to start off the newcomer over there under very favorable auspices. On the other hand, those who know nothing whatever about these things find it much more difficult to make the beginning over there than they would here. Scientific studies such as chemistry, physics, electricity, and so forth can be tremendously developed over there since the nature of vibration is far better understood on the other side than it is with us. The man who benefits least by the change to the new world is the materially minded person who has developed no mental or spiritual resources whatever while on this plane. Being interested only in material things, in food and drink and money, in social success, worldly honors, and material possessions in general, he naturally finds himself rather stranded in a world where none of these things have any meaning. Nevertheless, if he has led an average, honest, clean life, and on the whole behaved decently according to his lights, he will be nothing worse than extremely bored until his higher faculties begin to unfold in the course of time. Now consider the man or woman who lives wholly for the body and is dominated by it, the sensualist, the dysposmaniac, the drug addict. Physical cravings, being part of the mentality, are of course carried over to the next plane, but there is no physical body through which these appetites may be satisfied, and so the victim is tormented by desire but unable to satisfy it until, in the course of time, these desires fade out by starvation. This is the natural punishment for allowing the physical body to assume control, and surely it is punishment enough. Indeed, we find what is called poetic justice running right through the universe. The rewards of positive thought and action are the natural consequences following upon these things, and the punishments following upon wrongdoing or neglect are natural consequences too. Like begets like. Take care of your body, and you are rewarded with the joy of health, not with money. Take care of your business, and you are rewarded with prosperity, not necessarily with health. Work hard at your music, and the reward is to be an accomplished musician. Neglect it, and no money will buy the proficiency that you have failed to earn. Ill-treat your body, and the natural punishment is sickness and discomfort, not a falling off in the value of your stocks and bonds. And so on through the whole gamut of life. We reap as we sow, whether it be on the earth plane or on any of the etheric planes which lie beyond. It may be said here that it is not necessary to lead an ascetic life in this world in order to be happy in the next one. All the ordinary, harmless pleasures of life may be enjoyed in reasonable moderation without involving any suffering or hardship afterward. It sometimes happens when a person dies that instead of his going into a coma immediately after the silver cord is broken, there may be an interval of hours or longer in which he retains full possession of his faculties. And sometimes he does not even realize that he is dead, though as a rule he sees his physical body lying prone and knows what has happened. In such cases, he will make a strong effort to communicate with his closest friends. Suppose, for example, that a man died in the street and retained his faculties in this way. He would immediately try to get home to his wife to tell her what had happened. Let us suppose that his home was 10 miles away in the suburbs. Having now only an etheric body, he would really need but to think strongly of his home, and he would find himself there in a few seconds or less, because his etheric body could pass through houses, hills, or any other physical obstruction that might lie in the way. As a matter of fact, however, habit might lead him to go through the motions of walking to the nearest railroad station and getting into a train, or he might clamber onto a streetcar. On entering his home, he would instinctively shout to his wife, but having no physical organs, no sound would be produced. The effort would be purely mental, and she would hear nothing. He would then probably walk over to her and attempt to grasp her arm, but his etheric substance would simply pass through it without making any impression. It might happen, however, in such a case that the strong mental effort would reach the consciousness of the wife or whomever he was endeavoring to reach, and then she would afterward say, "My husband appeared to me for a moment at the time he was killed." His thought would be so charged with emotion that it would be strong enough upon reaching her to cause her to project a momentary thought form of him. It might, however, not be strong enough for this, and then she would merely say, "I knew that something had happened to my husband long before I got the news." This is the explanation of most such stories which are so constantly met with. In the same way, people have sometimes attended their own funerals before passing over. It is worthy of note that, since death makes no general change in us, those who possess a sense of humor retain it, and those who do not continue in the lack, and on such an occasion as this, those who do possess that useful gift are sometimes much amused at the proceedings, and those without it react also, as might be expected. Where there is a strong sense of bereavement, or where the survivors are left in tragic circumstances, the dead person will, of course, suffer acutely. As a matter of fact, the so-called dead are very sensitive to our thoughts for a considerable time after they have passed over to the other side. And for this reason, excessive grief is to be deprecated. It saddens them and prevents their focusing their attention as they should upon the new life which they're starting. Of course, it seems very hard to tell people not to grieve when one whom they have dearly loved passes out of sight. But the fact remains that excessive grief is bad for both parties. Remember that if there is a link of love, you will certainly meet again, and that nothing that is good or beautiful or true can ever be lost. On this plane, we often see our friends or our dearly loved ones go away to live in a distant country, knowing that we shall not see them again for several years, and death is really nothing more than this. Here I would impress upon those who are responsible for the support of others, husbands or fathers of families, for instance, the duty of making what reasonable provision they can for those who may be left behind without resources in case of their unexpected decease. It will save them a great deal of remorse and self-reproach on the other side if they can feel that at least they did what lay in their power to ease the burden of those who were dependent upon them. At this point, it may be well to explain that when a person is passing on, the body often undergoes violent twitchings and contortions, and most distressing moans may be emitted. This, however, need cause no uneasiness because such actions are purely reflex. The patient is totally unaware of them and is slipping gently and comfortably away. In a very small proportion of cases, it happens that after death, people become what is called earthbound, which means that they remain on this plane for an indefinite length of time, being unable to go on. This is simply due to the fact that their emotions are so fixed on something in this world that they cannot fall into the coma in which one passes across. It is exactly parallel to the case of a person who cannot fall asleep at night because his mind is so full of some dominating interest. A man can be so emotionally bound up with something here that he cannot get his attention off it even when he loses his body. Such an absorbing interest may be a piece of property, or it may be a person, or it may be some dominating activity, or it may be a crime which he committed here. In the last case, his thoughts anchor him to the neighborhood of the scene of the crime. As time goes on, this effect fades out and he passes over sooner or later, but in extreme cases, it may last for quite a long time. The moral of this, of course, is that you must not allow any one thing in the world to monopolize your attention to the exclusion of all other interests. The one thing that is worthy of unlimited devotion is the search for God. But this can possess our lives and yet never make us unbalanced. Nor does this mean that we ought to go through life without taking very much interest in anything in particular, for such a life simply would not be worth living. On the contrary, we should take a strong interest in all the events of life as they come to us, and the more things we are interested in, the better it will be, provided that interest is within the bounds of reason. In particular, we should be enthusiastically interested in our daily work, whatever it may be, but again, always within the bounds of reason. Nothing must have such a strangling grip upon the heart that the loss of that particular thing would make the rest of our lives to be meaningless. This is the true understanding of the Eastern virtue of detachment, namely, a keen, intelligent interest in the things which are with us while they are with us, with complete readiness to pass on to new things when the signal comes. Living in this way, there will never be any possibility of being earthbound. We can pray for those who have passed on, and indeed, it is a sacred duty to do so. Prayers for the so-called dead have been used in most parts of the world in most ages. The practice was generally discontinued after the Reformation because it had been greatly abused and commercialized, but nevertheless, it is an excellent practice in itself. You should pray for your friend who has passed on exactly as you would pray for him if you were living in some distant spot on this globe, say China or South Africa. Realize peace of mind, freedom, and understanding for him, and that God is life and intelligence and love. The presence is excellent for this purpose. Read it to him silently, saying you, where the text says I. Now I come to the problem of the disposal of dead bodies and of funeral arrangements in general. Here, let me say bluntly that most of our accepted burial customs are really pagan survivals and are wanting both in intelligence and in decency. We tolerate them only because we are more or less accustomed to them, and, indeed, when it comes about that thoughtful people attend a conventional funeral for the first time, they are invariably both shocked and repelled. The whole thing really implies that the deceased person is there in the grave, although hardly anybody nowadays believes that. Why Christians, who profess to believe in the immortality of the soul, should treat the physical remains as though they were something sacred, passes comprehension. Such an attitude is neither logical nor intelligent. You should realize this fact very clearly. There is nothing whatever sacred about a dead body. It is a collection of physical matter for which the ex-owner has no further use, and it should be disposed of in as cleanly and expeditious manner as possible. And that is all. Its late owner wore out a number of physical bodies during his life. As you probably know, we get a number of new bodies by a gradual replacement as we go through life. And this is only the last of them that is being buried ceremoniously. That is all. Remember that the beauty of a beautiful body comes from the soul that shines through it and does not lie in the body itself. That soul with its beauty and joy has now gone, and the body left is but an old garment which has been discarded. This garment should be disposed of for the sake of the living, with respect, but not with reverence. And the proper method of doing is by cremation. One should be quite clear about this. The disposal of the body is simply a duty to the living and not in any way an honor to the deceased who takes no further interest in it. Fire is cleanly, purifying, and respectful. The body should be cremated after a lapse of about 3 days, except in cases where rapid decomposition has set in, when cremation may take place immediately. The body having been cremated, it is better not to preserve the ashes. Only a morbid satisfaction can come from keeping these gruesome relics. They should be scattered over some growing grass or thrown on the sea or on a river or lake, of course with a prayer. For the same reason, monuments of any kind in cemeteries are out of place and should, if it is at all possible, be avoided, even where family considerations have made burial unavoidable. A little reflection will show you that to erect a monument over a cast-off body is just as unreasonable as it would be for you to bury an old suit of clothes and then put a monument over that. Certainly, you should avoid visiting the grave of your loved one. You know that he is not in the cemetery, so keep away from it. Pray for him in the sanctuary of your own home. No other place is any more sacred or more appropriate for prayer than your home. On his birthday or any other significant anniversary, have a bunch of flowers in remembrance of him, but let this be done at home and not in the graveyard. If you happen to have a portrait of him, you can put the flowers in front of that. Of course, this should only be done occasionally and not kept up as any everyday practice. You should avoid wearing mourning. Do not swathe yourself in black for the sake of your loved one who is not dead, but very much alive. And at this point, I may mention that it is not well, in a general way, to keep personal things belonging to the deceased if you're doing this in a sentimental and morbid spirit. Here, you will need discrimination. There is no objection to keeping a few mementos if you are certain that you are not doing it in the spirit of mourning, thinking that he is dead. On the other hand, the idea of maintaining his room or his books and so forth just as he left them, as some people do, is completely wrong and pagan. The deceased would not wish it and would probably laugh good-naturedly at you if he could make you know it. All conditions belonging to the past should, as far as possible, be broken up to make way for the living present. Here I wish to explain that while the foregoing instructions are what really should be done, yet in certain cases it will not be possible for family reasons to carry them out. If other members of your family are old-fashioned in their views, particularly the older members, parents for instance, then it is often well to give way and do what they expect, rather than wound their deepest feelings. It may be that while you know better, they do not. And so if cremation would shock them, have the body buried and attend the funeral in the name of Christian charity. Of course, the expressed wish of the deceased should always be carried out. We should do all that we can within reason to avoid giving pain in these matters to parents and older relatives. On the other hand, do not compromise in order to spare the feelings of young people, because they ought to learn better, and never consider the opinions of neighbors or distant relatives in such matters. A man in New York told me that he was not wearing black because he knew that his recently deceased sister was not dead, but that on visiting his parents' home, which he had every few weeks, he wore mourning to avoid scandalizing them. I told him that he was quite right, and that such was the course I always advised in these matters. A word had better be said here about suicide. The majority of those who take their own lives are so worried or terrorized at the time that they are not morally responsible for the act, and so it is not really suicide but rather death by misadventure. Such people fare on the other side like anyone else. In a genuine case of suicide, however, it is very different. Conscious and intentional self-destruction is a crime severely punished by nature. It is a refusal to meet the problems of life, and obviously it cannot be possible to do that successfully. Those who seek this way out do not meet their friends on the other side. They are lonely and unhappy and are apt to find themselves in a confused mental state, which is really subjective, a kind of vague dream which sometimes makes them think they are wandering about in a dense fog. Of course, they can be greatly helped by prayer, as can all others. Ultimately, they have to face all over again precisely the kind of problem they have run away from, with time wasted and suffering experienced for nothing. Now, I reach the problem of whether it is possible or not to communicate with those who have passed on into the next world. On this subject, an enormous number of books have been published, and a most acrimonious and bitter controversy has raged up and down the world for a very long time. Indeed, many people seem unable to touch on this subject and at the same time retain either their common sense or their good manners. The most violent epithets are hurled at one another by controversialists on both sides, and I have known several long-standing friendships to be severed over just this question of whether or not it is possible for us to communicate with the so-called dead. Extremists on one side say dogmatically that it is absolutely impossible to do so. Enthusiasts on the other side claim that they are in clear and intimate communication with their deceased friends as frequently as once or twice a week or oftener. What is the truth? Well, the truth is that communication does occasionally take place, but that it is far rarer than most believers in it suppose, and that it is always accomplished with considerable difficulty and uncertainty. It is not in the least like telephoning from New York to Chicago. It is more like the very early days of Marconi's experiments in wireless, when an occasional and very broken message came through, but much more often mere atmospheric disturbances and meaningless movements of the instruments were all that could be registered. Do not dabble in psychic things. If you wish to investigate thoroughly and scientifically, well and good, but this will be the work of years and will call for scientific conditions. The chief objection to the running after mediums that so many people practice is that it is really a running away from the responsibilities of this life. Professional mediums say that they seldom get a client who is happy, whose life is full of prosperity and self-expression. On the contrary, it is those whose lives here are frustrated and unhappy, irrespective of a particular bereavement, who are always trying to communicate with the next plane. Thus, it becomes what is called in psychology an escape mechanism, and it can almost be as disastrous as taking to drink or narcotic drugs. Your business is to live here in this world while you are here, to face up to your problems here and try to solve them, and to live in the next world when you get there. There is a truly spiritual mode of communication from which nothing but good can come. It is this: sit down quietly and remind yourself that the one God really is omnipresent. Then reflect that your real self, the divine spark of you, is in the presence of God now, and that the real self, the divine spark of your loved one, is also in the presence of God. Do this a few minutes every day, and sooner or later you will sense a communication. However, no detailed message will come, as a rule, only a definite and unmistakable sense that he knows you have thought of him and that he is thinking of you. People often ask what they should do to prepare themselves for the next world. The best way to prepare for the future is to live rightly today. Lead a clean, honest life, embodying in your conduct the highest that you know at the time. Be as useful as you can to others. Do all that you can to help other people in any way that is open to you. Everyone has some opportunity of service, physical, mental, or spiritual, and these opportunities must be used. If you seem to have no opportunities to help others, go to work and manufacture some. Learn the truth of being. Learn as much as you can about the nature of God, the only thing really worth knowing, and learn what man is and what life really means. This world is a school, that and nothing more, and provided you learn your lesson, nothing else matters. It does not really matter whether you are rich or poor, cultured or simple, a king or a scavenger. These are only the roles that men enact on the stage of life. How the role is acted is what matters. The two supreme lessons set for this school are the lesson of the omnipresence of God and the lesson of the power of thought. Every negative or difficult thing that enters into your life marks your inability to realize the presence of God at that point, and it is therefore but the signal for another step to be made. Make that step in spiritual understanding, and never again throughout eternity will that particular task have to be done. The power of thought is the second great lesson that we have to master. And here again, as Jesus told us, the tree is known by its fruits. Now that you understand these things in some degree, it should be possible for you to go through life and to meet death with the even mind to which a modern seer referred. You should be habitually cheerful and happy, neither unduly elated by seeming good fortune, nor unduly depressed by temporary adversity, because you assess both of these at their correct value. You should never be so completely wedded to any particular set of conditions, to a house, to a district or a job, or a vocation, or to any earthly arrangement, that you cannot part from it without undue regret. You should not be dependent for your happiness or self-respect upon human praise or approval, though such things may be appreciated in their place. Your attitude should be, I do my duty and enjoy myself where I am. I do my job and pass on to another. I am going to live forever. In 1,000 years from now, I shall still be alive and active somewhere. In 100,000 years, still alive and still active somewhere else. And so the events of today have only the importance that belongs to today. Always the best is yet to be. Always the future will be better than the present or the past, because I am ever growing and progressing, and I am an immortal soul. I am the master of my fate. I greet the unknown with a cheer and press forward joyously, exulting in the great adventure. Armed with this philosophy and really understanding its power, you have nothing to fear in life or death, because God is all and God is good. Note: I would impress upon readers of this essay that no written description can really do justice to the subject. It can but hint and suggest the truth. However correct the itinerary of a journey may be, it is likely to seem somewhat dry and unattractive when read, since the beauty and joy of the new adventure must evade the written word. This essay, of course, describes the experiences of the soul between incarnations. End of section. My dear one, if you haven't done so, be so kind, hit that like button. Let's head over to the next video as we continue this book titled Power Through Constructive Thinking by Emmet Fox. The next video will touch up on reincarnation.